Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.
Buonasera a tutti.
Hello everyone. Today the meeting ends and we end this third session of the talk founded by the Foundation for the Subsidiarity. We've been trying to get to grips with what our country represents and what the National Recovery Plan could represent, the PNRR. What's working in Italy, what isn't working. This is Irene. Good afternoon, Federico, and everyone who's following us. These are themes about the National Recovery Plan that we've been trying to deepen with various ministers, university lecturers, business people. We want to get to grips with this looking at the wider European context, because obviously the European reforms need to be in constant dialogue with the European Union. Welcome Carlo Calenda, MEP and Secretary of the Action Party, Azione. With him, Irene Tinagli, President of the Commission for Monetary and Monetary Affairs, of Economic and Monetary Affairs of the European Parliament. And once again, Enzo Moavero Milanesi, Professor of European Law at Lewis University, Guido Carli, and the College of Europe in Bruges. And once again, Mario Mauro, President of the Moavero Research Center. Good evening, everyone. So we'll start our dialogue, this conference. We've been following the theme of what we've been talking about over the past few days. Today, the price of petrol has spiked. The energy crisis is becoming a central part of the wider political debate. Worries about business people and families, about rising prices. So why is it so difficult to find a common agreement in all of Europe? So first, we need to get to grips with what the question is actually asking. We're facing the kind of greatest economic tsunami that's affected Europe since the COVID pandemic. The situation is relatively banal. If you think about it, the price of petrol has increased by 10 times. And it's not just this. We have two topics that are fundamental. I'll try and explain them in under a minute, because the first point of politics is to explain before you make statements. We're faced with the season that goes from September to the end of March, which is the most difficult season, because now we've filled our gas stockpiles, and from now on, we'll start emptying them. In this empty period, we consume about 53 billion cubic meters of gas. What's the problem? The problem with is this: 49% of this used to come from Europe. This 40%, which we cannot rely on anymore. Mario Draghi did a great job because now 33 billion cubic meters will come from other places like Algeria. There was a big fight to create this pipeline, and I was a minister at the time, and there was it was a very polemical issue building this pipeline. This pipeline now, and there was a couple of issues of trees being planted and uprooted, and a couple of them have been replanted in Asilea. So in this kind of national energy strategy, there's a couple of things which you can't find elsewhere in the world that have been cancelled. Just like how the East Med gas that was trying to connect Israel with Europe, passing through Cyprus, and that means the decisions we make have wide consequences. We're a country that can never manage to decide something to fix our decisions, and that's a problem. So we have about 55 minus 33. All of that's about we've got about 12 billion stockpiled cubic meters. We've got a bit of gas, about a billion cubic meters worth. We're really walking a fine line here between what we need. So why is this the Piombino boat important? And this is because it can be fixing pipelines at sea, and it can be used very quickly, and it can generate about 5 billion. It can drill for about 5 billion worth of gas that can give us a small reserve just in case there's a spike in consumption. Right now, gas is treated with a wider European price that's set in Holland, and this is the kind of the problem, the rational problem. The European price that's set in Holland is subject to financial speculation. That means it's a market price that's built on futures, and it was at 260 not long ago. It's over 320 now. The people of Holland don't want to reach the kind of the maximum cap of prices, and the Norwegians don't want the prices to lower because they're making a boatload of money due to high prices. There's a discussion, an ongoing difficult discussion right now. We cannot manage to agree on a fix on a price, because if you set a price on lower gas that's too high, people will go and buy their gas elsewhere. So the thing we have now is that 43% of our energy is 40% of our energy is produced by gas, but it's basically as if it was all produced by gas, because the prices renewables are sold at is tied to the price of gas. So Draghi's proposal was to detach the price of renewables from the price of gas, because if not, there are plants that have been selling power at 50 euros per megawatt, and now they're selling them at 300. So they're making boatloads of money now. And now we've been injecting 10 billion for businesses, because otherwise they won't open. And there's a problem now that there's three things at play. That's Salvini, Conte, and Berlusconi that have caused people to lose faith in the government. And so to do everything we've been talking about isn't easy at all for this government. So what I've proposed is to kind of take a break from the election campaign. We take one day out, all party leaders, to support the Draghi government, even if we need to make a political shift, and to sign a commitment for everyone to commit to our future gas production. Because it makes no sense that while Draghi was in Algeria to get gas, everyone was against the Piombino plan, that was protesting against Piombino, and protesting against creating the gas plant that was the plan we'd set in place. So let's answer straight away. If we can get back to the question of the theme of Europe. In Europe, the situation is quite complicated, because there was this idea that there was a gas shortage also in Germany, and Germany, having a strong dependence on Russian gas, even more than ours, the Germans were afraid that Russia would be able to react by cutting production of Europe to Europe, something which is they're already doing really. And so what Draghi was saying months ago is trying to understand the logic of the proposal, which is that, look, regardless, natural gas is a weapon. It's a loaded gun that even Russia can use. We need to move first as one with one accord. We need to apply a certain pressure and a certain cap on gas prices. It's not like Russia can just turn its pipelines around and send it somewhere else. They'll need to pay our prices. Prices are continuing to rise in the meantime. This increases Russian profits, which can now builds up stockpiles to afford it. It can now afford to shut off production for a few days. They've been making massive profits, and so they're playing on this factor now. Right now, Scholz is in Canada. He's been in Canada for a while, trying to get LPG from Canada, but they don't know how they're going to transport it from the west coast to the Atlantic in order to ship it to Europe. So it's a very difficult situation, even for Germany, which has been moved a lot later than the Italian government, even on the diversification of energy sources, of trying to make more renewal, to reduce dependence on natural gas. And so I hope that even Germany becomes aware of this crisis. What Premier Draghi obtained, which in Italy it hasn't been appropriately valued, the fact that this proposal of setting a cap on gas prices, which many other European countries didn't want, needs to be taken into consideration, that the European Commission should commit to making a proposal to bring to the European Council, but that unfortunately hasn't happened in time for October. In October, the European leaders should discuss the Commission's proposal. Unfortunately, Draghi will not be at that table in October, and I think I fear this will have a serious weight on it. And I'm sad to hear that we've been hearing a lot of external European forces talking about needing a cap on gas prices. If we'd had a strong premier at that time in order to negotiate this in Europe, we'd have had a much stronger chance to bring home a better result for Italy. So having said this, we have a government, it's functioning. The ministries and the minister himself, they're all working. They've been back in Rome recently. There'll soon be a cabinet meeting, and they'll discuss various proposals. The plan about stockpiles is ahead of what the stage other countries are at, and they'll be talking about trying to reduce usage. We're one of the countries that's better prepared, widely speaking, and we have to look about building more. We have to talk about gas pipelines, but also weaning ourselves off gas. We've been talking about setting a gas cap, a cap on prices. It's not a cap on gas price necessarily, but a cap on to try and decouple as we were talking about, decoupling the price of renewables from the price of gas, which could cost much, much less. So there was the decree from March that, however, lacked the force to do what we need now. We need new decrees, new laws in order to empower the government to take the measures we need. We need to accelerate this process, and we need to do that by the market's already there. It's already controlled, that of energy prices. We are allowed to intervene with the proposals we have. We can reduce prices for people's bills. We need to take all these components, and we need to use our public entities, which can make long-term countries using long-term contracts, using renewable energy to reduce every family's energy bill. These are proposals we can solidly work on in the future moving forwards. Incrementally, we'll build on it, but unfortunately, we've been slowed down by the election campaign, but we'll move on sooner or later. Can you take?
Mario Mauro, we'd like to ask you as well, in perspective, in light of your European experiment, so the experience, the plan to save the winter is underway. Perhaps we could have dared a bit more. I think that the question is of fundamental importance because it has to do with the economy in a broad sense, but also industries and companies in a general sense to go back and after the summer break. Europe is invested entirely by this problem. And for example, in France, who had invested a lot at that time with nuclear energy, now they find themselves in trouble. And also, in connection to the rising of prices, we have also the climate change and everything connected to the environment. So the European problem needs to be faced as a European problem. And yes, I think we can do more. We can use the present moment because the document that has been adopted by the Commission, which still needs to become active, gets to talks about what is happening and looks after the effects of the war, but now it has been revisited and reviewed in light of what has happened in more recent times. What is very important is that this will work if we make it work on a European level, because if we start working as single nations, well then inevitably we will have a worsening of the conditions of each member state's budget. So it's a European battle that Italy and despite their political orientation, must look at, and it regards everybody, the functioning of the whole economic system, the industrial and manufacturing sector, which makes Italy one of the most important exporters, can't afford to face this situation of lack of gas, of shortage of gas. At the beginning, we had a plan to dismantle certain companies that had been founded during the fascist period. And then we had someone like Mattei, who created a country with much more strategic autonomy. We need to find this autonomy, this strategic autonomy on a European level. It just cannot work on a national level. And we must get Germany itself involved, because by ourselves, we really reduce our power as we become much more vulnerable as a whole. My experience has mainly been tied to the fact that when we have situations that have huge consequences and that can become truly a huge burden across the board, across the whole nation, there is a common sense, a logic of common sense, as you have already pointed out, that if Italy is a train on this journey, if it encounters this boulder, then traditionally it wouldn't be enough for the right or the left to resolve it. But we really need a common strategy, a common effort. This effort has to do with a very complicated context, which is the European context, and therefore what happens is that irony of luck comes in. When we decided a European plan and decided the maximum cap for gas, this was decided on the 20th of October. We chose to negotiate this. And I very humbly propose, I would say that every citizen needs to now give their vote and express their opinion in the elections. Well, would you prefer the people to negotiate this on the 20th of October? Would you prefer for it to be Draghi or the many others that are going up for election soon? This is a question I ask you. Okay, so since now ask yourselves that question. The people that have just explained what they have explained to us give us the necessary elements to understand the response. Because the result that we would like is to get closer to the solution. We must help each other face this issue. The central question is that this question that I've just asked you, that we all need to ask, is what the markets are also asking each other. This is what the market will ask itself. Because this is, we'll come to that in a minute. The question is, the following question is, the topic of energy, as all the topics of this electoral campaign and the political integration of Europe are not a question of election campaign, but these topics have to do with life. This is discussion on life. The question is, how will I respond to these questions with a little cross on a piece of paper, with war and with energy? It's a topic, it's a question of guaranteeing life for our companies. What will happen to the small companies with those energy bills? It's not a market speculation, but the survival of our businesses. We have been asked by Mario Draghi to ask ourselves these questions.
Andarlo ad ascoltare Mario Draghi.
So we'll talk about Mario Draghi. Yesterday, the president of the Council of Ministers was here. Here's a brief passage of what he said at the meeting on the topic of the recovery plan, the National Resilience and Recovery Plan, as it's known in Italy. Okay. The National Plan of Resilience and Recovery is a final test of our recovery and resilience. Our European partners have pledged themselves to tax their citizens in future to enable Italy today to recover more quickly from the pandemic crisis, to modernize its productive structures. The majority of Italians have long expected reforms and investments that make the economy more efficient and sustainable, that put the South, young people and women at the center of the country. This spirit has animated the policies that we've put in place, from competition to the agenda of simplifications, of justice. This spirit guides investments that we've made, from crèche to railways to the improving our water network. The financing of the recovery plan is 191.5 billion euros. And this depends on the assessment that the European Commission makes of our plan and of its implementability. So it depends on our capacity to achieve all these innovative policies that we've devised, as we have done so far. We have achieved all the objectives. We have achieved all our objectives of the first two deadlines of the plan, and we are working to achieve the highest possible number before the change of government. So the National Recovery Plan is $191 billion euros worth for Italy, devised into various different missions. These are investments that have been planned, were planned before an economic and geopolitical massive shift before the war, before this issue that is now making investments cost much more, which before could have been a few months ago much cheaper. So what stage is the recovery plan in now, the PNRR? So a couple of small shifts, marginal adjustments on some costs can be made. They've already been made, a couple of interventions by our government in that sense to regulate and give a certain level of easing the margins in that sense, and we can use additional funds. We have other resources available to ease this plan, either national or other funds, to try and fill out certain areas and make a buffer for the increase of prices. So the topic of renegotiating the PNRR by saying, oh, I don't want to do this anymore because I've decided I'm not going to use these money for infrastructure anymore. I'm not going to use it for capping spending. I'm not going to do that anymore. This means rewriting the plan. It means needing to give the plan back to the Commission. It needs to be reapproved. It needs to be reapproved by the Council. And that means going back to renegotiations, discussing deadlines. And that means in the meantime, losing dates, wasting time. I remember that you can renegotiate everything, but you cannot renegotiate the time frames of the recovery fund, of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. It has fixed deadlines. And what does this tell us? That by 2023, all the resources need to be invested. That means that we must have made all our investments before 2023. Then we'll have time until 2026 to bring these funds to bear and to complete our projects. So if we use the next 6-7 months rewriting plans, redrawing treaties, then obviously we won't be able to spend all this money. It will be wasted. It's a political choice. Some can say, you know, instead of 190, we'll make 140, but we'll remake the plan how we want. But that way you lose 30, 40, 50 billion euros worth of investment, which I think are vital for the recovery of this country. So I've never found anywhere a line that says exactly what people want from those who've been saying they want a renegotiation of the plan. They haven't told us what they want. So I'm not saying this as a politician. I'm saying it as as a representative of the Commission for Economic and Monetary Affairs, which is the group that's going to monitor this plan. This is exactly what we monitor. No one in Europe has understood. And some parties have been talking about redrawing, renegotiating the plan. The fact no one in Europe has understood what they mean is very bad. It implements great uncertainty about this national recovery plan, which is what absorbs almost a third of all the resources Europe is pooling. This is an enormous problem. We need to understand what's awaiting us. So on this, I'd like to hear from Calenda, because surely this is you've been a supporter of Draghi's agenda, and so achieving our objectives in the pre-agreed deadlines is a proof of credibility, and therefore is essential. So it's a problem in Italy that usually ministers have never run a business before. They have no idea how the economy works, really. You can tell it to yourselves however you want it. They've never worked they've never worked at a bar. They've never run their own business. They don't know what they're talking about. The simple point is, Italy doesn't know what the term implementation means. That is the capacity to achieve, not to create plans, to make vague promises. But we need to move to progress into a concrete plan. This is a sum of the problem Italy has always had, and we always get stuck by this. We're always talking about what needs to be done. It's always the same thing. It's been the same for 390 years, and bureaucracy is a problem. Well, okay, but I was talking with some business people earlier who they buy gas and they resell it. Okay, well, who's gone to see what specifics they have? You know, they pay gas prices earlier, and so no bank is supporting the fact that they can't sell their gas. So who's talking about these problems so that to detach the price of gas from renewables, you have to create an obligation for selling gas, which is a big problem we've had in Europe with the G7. And who's going to talk about this? We're talking about European problems which have always been the same. It's been the same for 30 years. And this is the reason problems never get solved. Because there's no capacity to sit down and see a progression, to see a process in place. I come from business, so I use that as an example. It's as if a business had a CEO and he turns up and he says, our aims are A, B, C, D. And then he says, all right, bye, see ya, go do it yourselves. No business like that would ever work. So what do you do with there's been 15 billion funds wasted, and these are all in press conferences. You know, people people talk about made in Italy, you know, nothing happens with this money. Because then there's a commission is made, it sets parameters no one understands, it tries to explain things to businesses, they need to show they have to do 18 different certifications, but by the time they get to a plan, the business has failed, the times have changed, the world's a totally different place. So the 4.0 plan worked because it was innovative. Businesses could act without using political problems. The PNRR is necessary. It has a chance to achieve. It must achieve, or it will never achieve ever again. Does it have a political class that's able to not to manage, not just to announce, or does it not have this? And this is a crucial struggle Italy has, because when we talked about the program, we said, let's implement this action plan Italia Viva was talking about, and then we'll move on to the PNRR. And it will be difficult, and we'll need to give 2 billion to the regions to do their own projects, or otherwise things won't work for building. And we need to think about this, that in Italian politics, on the right, in the left, the fascists, Don Camillo, Don Pippone, Zio Peppo, it's always the same stuff. We need to get back to common sense, and common sense requires a managerial competence, because without this, we'll never be able to build anything.
We have here 2 ex-ministers, and of course we're going to get them also to comment what Calenda has just said. We don't want to enter into politics, of course, here, though, in this conference. I want to just go back to what President Draghi said. He used these words. The recovery plan was made possible because it enabled Italy to recover more quickly from the pandemic crisis, to modernize its productive structure. We are in front of perhaps a greater solidarity amongst ourselves. This is a question. Yes. We have to absolutely say yes. The system of the European budget is a system that bases itself on payments that each member state gives based on its GDP. For the most part. Of course, then we have other funds that are linked to VAT tax, etc. And the European Union then also has taxes for imports and exports as well. So a part of all of these funds, each member state pays their taxes. And a part of this goes towards the European Union. And so therefore, the 1% of all of this corresponds to the GDP of the whole of the European Union. And for each member state, this corresponds to over 25% of its GDP. So this gives us an idea that for the USA, it's over 25%. So this gives us the idea in proportion between the GDP of Europe and the USA. So for the first time, Europe decided to go for a new instrument and looked at public debt. And for the first time, the European Union looked at the markets, and a part of this was given to all the member states in proportion to the loss of GDP that they had undergone because of the pandemic. So we are actually quite lucky because Spain is actually in a similar situation to ours. It is evident that this is a huge turning point, because now we are deciding to look at public debt as a common issue in Europe. and solidarity in the sense of collective debt for the first time, to assist the weakest members of the family, we could say, just like a family would do. We're distributing our resources in a different way. I am part of that part of the population which was asking for this kind of reform for a long time, but at the same time it hasn't become structured enough yet. And perhaps the states that have this already, the structure already put in place, see within debt something as very negative in itself. I think that, however, in terms of the talents, the parable of talents, we have a sort of a debt towards the Lord who gave the talents. So each person has their own gifts, and there is certainly someone who's going to help us, but we won't find more money perhaps. So the responsibility is ours. We need a solution where solidarity, European solidarity, responds on behalf of all those who are the weakest in the community. I wanted to just ask you if you wanted to add anything. Yes, I'd like to just add something. It's not only that the countries are mistrustful towards debt, but they are fearful that this great trust that they gave us might not be well used, might be taken advantage of. And this step forward they would probably help us more if they see that effectively this trust, these tools that they've given us are being well used and bear fruits in the Italian economy and therefore for the European economy, because we are all connected now. And in Mario Draghi's speech, this was what we could hear between the lines, because it's really an act of trust towards us. And we need to show, so far we have shown them that we are worthy of this trust. And now they are monitoring what's happening. And for up to now, Italy has been a model country who has been able to be faithful to all the promises and all the responsibilities that it has been entrusted with. This is for the future, for European solidarity, not for just our relationship with Europe, because this solidarity functions better than any other method. So it is through a dialogue with these institutions that we can go forward. How many times have we heard in politics that through fighting we have gotten to good solutions? Of course, never. And Mario Mauro, I would like to ask you, there is a question of international credibility on international markets. Italian debt is, for the most part, also present internationally. It is the speculation funds are speculating against Italian funds. Is Italy going to be weak? Is going to be the weakest link in the community from this point of view? Well, many things have already been said, but I would like to just explain something in particular. The main characteristic of the debates is the vindictiveness of the politicians toward the recovery plan, to show that they are responsible in using these funds. All those who propose this, they must really ask themselves, why did we get this money? We got this money because we're not in a good place. They're not the fruit of a particular negotiation skills. This is not how we got them. And maybe the most characteristic, this has been quoted many times over the past years, the fragility of Italian politics is because it has produced reforms and guaranteed and has not increased its productivity, and therefore it has not shown to be able to be incisive and become determinate effects in reality. Solidarity should be understood as the only element that can help us in this European system, to help us. Medieval theology tells us that we live to go to paradise. In the 1900s, it has been said that we can go to paradise not only because we want to go to paradise, but because we have a fear of hell. So this, in a way, is how we're thinking. First we got the pandemic, then we got a war in Europe, and then we had the energy crisis. So we haven't quite gotten towards hell, but we're getting close. So a structural and collective solidarity with the Eurobonds and the initiatives that enabled these special funds to be creative has this kind of mentality behind it. So we're at a very important point in our history, and it is so important that if the obstacle to actually getting this train that is passing by us, if we were the impediment to actually taking advantage of these benefits that are coming our way, we want to become a Europe that doesn't speak about national interest of each member state, but a clear federal vision. Europe is something that works 100% if you begin to integrate and you put yourself in the perspective of solidarity, and therefore to accomplish the aims that we envision ourselves, that we set out to accomplish. All of this is supported by interdependence in a logic that is truly European, that was in accordance with the founding fathers of Europe. I saw this in the testimony of our Prime Minister. He became a leader in Italy, not because he cried out louder than the others, but because he was courageous enough to jump on that train that German Prime Minister, the French Prime Minister are obliged to get onto. This is the great bet that Europe must face. That we have this historical circumstance, we won't have a different situation. We will have a conflict, and it won't be between Ukraine and Russia. It will be in a conflict between member states that didn't want to work together, and we will go back to a situation where there was disunity and everybody lost out, with greater even economic issues.
So it's often hard to understand, and we need to fight back here. I think there's a choice Europe and Italy needs to make, and this choice is being strong together or being destroyed alone. Being great together means having the strength to understand that we need to, you know, when I was an ambassador for the EU for a brief time, I always told my staff that when we went to the EU, we had to be more German than the Germans. We had to turn up early with more correctly prepared, and this is the challenge. If there's a strong challenge that we have, it's to show that if we commit to doing things seriously, with care, paying attention, and studying them properly, following the logic, we can do anything. It's not, you know, we aren't playing in the highest league. We drive the entire system. And this implements a strange paradox, I think, and it's totally, I can't get to grip. I can't understand. We admire figures like Mattarella and Draghi, and to us, they seem to be a kind of ideal Italy. And yet we always vote for completely opposite figures like Mattarella and Draghi. We vote against the people. I promise I wouldn't talk about I wouldn't make an electoral campaign here. I promise I'll be good. I just want to say one more thing. I believe that in time, and in a generic way, in time, we have people who represent the institutions of which we recognize their authority, but politics in time has become a type of consumption. That is, ways for people or of messages. I won't name names, because if not, someone will have a heart attack. But simple, meaningless messages that answer to the immediate moment of our state of mind, rage, base emotions, and this generates separation. Politics should be the things which it is etymologically, the art of managing the polis, the art of ruling properly. Otherwise, politics is just noise. But if we look at what we like about, we should look about what we like about Draghi and vote for it. This is what's going to make us strong in Italy and in Europe. Final round table with the last minutes we have on a central topic for us. We're at the Rimini meeting that was born over 40 years ago with the net time meeting for the friendship among peoples. This year, it's happening while bombs have started falling in Ukraine once again, very close to us here. And we'll start with you. We'll go, what role can Italy play to build peace? So first of all, a quick summary of what's in play right now. It's often misunderstood. Effectively, what it means is we're moving at a supersonic speed towards the attempt of the redefinition of a new world order, which we can summarize like this: the Russians want the Yalta. They want to go back to the Yalta conference. They want to get back to the status quo of the Soviet times. They want to regain their great power status and to be able to dictate policy across the world. The Chinese, who are definitely Russian allies in this game of chess, they don't want the Yalta plan. They want a new kind of Yalta balance of power. When Yalta was being discussed, they were in the middle of a civil war, and India wasn't even involved back then. But now it's a major player. The Americans, who took on the role of world police from the Second World War, and after the fall of the Soviet Union, they haven't been understanding what Brzezinski, one of their greatest political thinkers, who taught at Georgetown, and who was the confidant of many presidents, he's always said it in a very clear way. He said, Russia can't do without Ukraine, because without Ukraine, Russia is an important power, but in Asia. With Ukraine, it becomes a world and a European player. So we've been talking with all this various talk about stopping 1 centimeter before, after. For Russia, the total dominion of Ukraine and of other territories is an indispensable fact for them. It's going to happen. So in this brief summary I've made, who I haven't been talking about. In 1945, was there a Europe? Was there a European Union? No, there wasn't. And so, why has the European Union not been playing its cards correctly in this game? Because outside the kind of the theater of war and peace, Europe cannot defend itself. It cannot defend even its own great richness, its own treasures. The EU knows that war is coming. There's not only war in Ukraine. There's war in South Sudan. In 37 years, there's been over 3 million deaths, and you never hear about it. There's war as well in North Sudan against the Nubians. There's war in Central Africa. There's war in Congo. There's war in the Sahel region. There's war in Eritrea. Be careful. These things don't have zero consequences for Europe, because France was kicked out of the Sahel region, and the Russian Wagner company, their mercenaries filled in the gap France left. And so it's our responsibility, it's the responsibility of a structured responsibility among the European community. It's essential for Italy's future. And for the future, I'm talking about survival here. Because if ENI finds new resources in Cyprus, the Turks, as they already have, would send frigates to block prospecting. Turks are in NATO, but Russia isn't. And for over 10 years, the Turks have been playing a kind of pantomime chess. We argue about everything: Syria, the Sahel, Nagorno-Karabakh, the Balkans, Libya, but we also agree on everything. They've been trying to increase their influence here. So let's end it here. Let's do what we've been talking about for ages. A common foreign and defense policy of the EU. That means we talk in a synthetic, common way as Europeans, not one at a time, and then the common European policy is simply a summary. This simply won't happen, surely. This hasn't happened yet because the EU, which we've all been talking about, which even Mario has been making a lot of references to, what is the EU? So we all have a various idea. We read it on the labels on products. We've always been saying that you need to refer to the EU to resolve wider problems. But what is the EU? Is it a federation? No. Is it a confederation? No. Is it an international organization? Yes, but it's a hybrid. It's present in certain issues and on a question of stability and how that we need to to package certain products and how we need to manage certain resources. But we're faced by defense and foreign policy. We're faced by phenomena like migration, questions of taxation, problems of management of health policy, and the EU doesn't exist or exists very little. So many say simplifying the problem. The issue is that the EU works on unanimity. Unanimous decisions are very few. For example, we don't decide on questions of migration by unanimity. By unanimity, we don't decide on energy policy, and yet on European level, we do not agree even on a unanimous way of these topics we've touched on. There's not even a complete connections within Europe. While talking about energy policy for over 30 years, we've been talking about this. So Europe needs to leave this ambiguity. How do we leave this ambiguity? By sitting around the table with goodwill and with political capability, with the desire to face a new European design, a new plan. My friends, we need to make a new European treaty which decides a constitutional structure that's precise, that allows us either normal people or political experts. It needs to be immediately obvious how this new Europe will work. Adenauer and Schumann's federation, the kind of General de Gaulle's confederation, maybe, but it's always been very difficult. It's been even more difficult, my friends, to sit around that table in 1950, 5 years after the end of the Second World War, which was the result of another terrible war, after which people sat at a common made a common agreement. Those of us these countries that had fought on opposite sides of vicious wars, how did the founding fathers manage to make these treaties after such terrible wars? We need to go back to the time of Adenauer. So I want to make you answer this question quickly. It's very interesting, I think. Other than trying to understand the role of Europe in peace, also the role of Italy within Europe. Objectively, we're talking about freedom, the ability to act as a community, the inviolable. Can we have a role within the internal discussion on Europe?
Of course we can. We have to. We have to contribute, absolutely. And I think that based on this year, after what Draghi has done, we have had a huge role within the European political debate based on foreign policy, with our relationship with Russia, our Atlantic foreign policy and relationships across the board, and with the United States. And I wouldn't absolutely, Draghi is one of the most able amongst all of the people involved on a European level, without wanting to offend any of his colleagues. If Italy, other than having its history, its geopolitical role, which is very important and very strategic, of course, which we have actually undervalued in the last couple of years, but with a competent and authoritative leadership to go hand in hand with this, yes, I think that Italy can absolutely maintain this role that it has had over the last couple of months, and continue to do what was said a second ago, that Europe still doesn't have an architecture, a structure that to have a common foreign policy. For example, it wouldn't make any sense to have a European army if we didn't have a common European political project and foreign policy. So we really need to start changing this common framework, this common architecture of the European structure. We have to stop with this, Europe hasn't done this, Europe hasn't done that, and it's the same politicians when we go and vote in Europe, and they vote against Europe. And of course then Europe complains about Italy, but if we don't give the resources, if we don't give credibility, we need another next generation, another recovery fund. Let's try and use what we have while we have it. And if we really want to do more in future, we need to give back. We need to give back what they've been giving us. So this is the opposition that we are going through at the moment, this contradiction. Italy can have a central role, even within a more integrated and federal structure. It's not because if we were to go towards a more federal system, Italy would not have less power. Actually, instead, we would have a huge leading role within this context. But we need to start building this from the ground up. I don't think that we will get to a situation that Moavero was talking about, a situation of a political position, a political revival in Europe. I think we will have Poland and Hungary, countries that have a culture and a structure that are very different. And the Hungarian ambassador said that international interference we faced the USSR alone. And what we lived, what we feel, is actually a huge burden in a sense. We have been used to holding this burden, and these countries wanted to become westernized and become a part of Europe. We can decide to do two things: either have a very diluted Europe, or have a Europe that goes towards a more integrated and collective and common unity, but with a shorter, more homogeneous countries and a restricted amount of countries. A system, therefore, that is more homogeneous. We can continue to talk about, I'm a federalist myself, we can talk about federalism, but I don't think that a federalist Europe will never come about. Thank you, Calenda. We need to conclude, but I'd like to leave the conclusion to Giorgio Vittadini, who is president of the Foundation for Subsidiarity. Well, from a political point of view, I feel that who is here on the stage says, well, we need to defend the recovery plan, we need to defend Italy along with Europe, in solidarity with Europe. And whoever does this goes against Europe, goes against each one of us. I think this is a very interesting political message. But there's also a message that has to do with the origin of this debate and with the debate with the secretaries, with the ministers, with Draghi. All of this happened because there is someone who is in a dialogue with politicians, who does not want to demonize them, but wants to dialogue with them. Our responsibility towards Europe is towards Europe as a people. If there are politicians who forget this and who enter into populist dynamics and want to destroy well-being, it's because they don't have people in front of them. They're not in a dialogue with anybody. And we saw politicians dialogue with people, and they are in a dialogue in a very precise way, respecting diversity. And I think that this is important. We should never be individualists. If Europe is the Europe of many populations, of many intermediary bodies, then the recovery plan will not be wasted. We are defending the social reality from De Gasperi onward, and we are going towards an integration. Thank you very much. So we're coming to an end here. This is the last conference ever. So I'd just like to thank who made all of this possible: Bollani, Giovanni Assandri, the Commission, Claudio Gelain, Luca Foré, Savia Becciu, all the journalists that made all of this possible. Thank you so much to everybody. Thank you to the guests, and thank you to all the audience for having followed us remotely and here in the meeting. We hope to see you next year. Thank you and goodbye.
Civiltà dell'amore, fratelli e sorelle, costruite senza stancarvi mai questa civiltà. Lavorate per questo, pregate per questo, soffrite per questo.